Hello and welcome, everybody. It's time for Train the Trainer, Train the Practitioner, Part 2. This is useful skills for performing site visits. And a heads up, you can probably see this if you look down at the scroll bar on the video, but this one's probably going to be a little bit longer. I'm actually going to do what they call a clips show, if you've heard of that. From the sitcom era, whenever they had a certain opportunity and they had enough programming, they would do a show that referenced earlier shows, and so they would play clips from that. So that's called the clip show. We're going to do kind of the same thing with this because we have some demonstrations that we've done a number of times. So what we're going to do is edit in some of the actual demonstrations that we've done for other organizations. So it should be kind of cool to edit that in. And it's the first time in my life I've ever done a clip show. So it should be fun. So what is Train the Trainer, Train the Practitioner? You know by now, you've heard this a couple of times, but the idea is we are here to equip you to get this toolkit out into the field. So you can go back to the earlier presentations to learn a little bit more about that. But we want to make a good opportunity to thank our wonderful benefactor on this. IMLS has given the Towards Gigabit Libraries Toolkit 2 rounds of grant funding, and that's why we're here. That's why we're able to do this, and we're so appreciative to that. It's had such a great impact. And also a big shout out, as always, to our program officer, who's been our guide and our mentor and our sounding board, Mr. James Neal. Stephanie and I, Stephanie Stenberg of Internet 2, Carson Block of Carson Block Consulting, we are your project co-directors. You've met us before, but wanted to show this again in case this is the first video that you've seen. If this is the first one, you should go back and look at the other videos. One is a very short video preparation for learning. It's short, but it's essential because we need you to look at a few things to be familiar. Part 1 is toolkit processes, orientation, and logistics, and this is part 2, useful skills for performing site visits. This is the benefit you'll have is getting the benefit of our experience in doing this. So be sure to do your own refresher on the toolkit sections if you haven't done that yet. We've emphasized this a few times, but familiarity with the toolkit is essential. We're also going to talk about Toolkit Approaches, the broadband improvement plan, tips and strategies for creating that, especially if you're a little timid about it, activities in practice, speed test, network diagram, and the Wi-Fi Stumbler, and some pro tips handling unique situations during site visits. And also I'll share a little bit of information about the difference between doing in-person versus virtual site visits. Virtual site visits are they're possible to do. Spoiler alert: they take a little bit more time because it needs more prep and deliberate actions beforehand, but they're definitely possible. Something that my office was able to pioneer during the COVID era. We needed to do some assessments, not for our project here, but for another client. And so, like I've said before, everything I do as a consultant concerning this type of work, it goes right into the toolkit. It's a great way to get best practices right into the hands of people who need them the most. So on your own, if you haven't looked at the toolkit in a while, break that bad boy out and start looking through it, page through it, make yourself familiar again. So there's different approaches, different ways to work through the toolkit. These are the 2 primary ways that we found that people have had success. For or 3, I guess. There's a hybrid, but usually it's one or the other. One is working through a section or sections together, and this is best for tech novices. This is for folks who are unfamiliar with tech at all, and the toolkit is strong enough for you to do that. You can just go in and start at the beginning of a section and work through to the end of the section together, and that's perfectly fine. The second way is interview and targeted toolkit sections, and that's best for the tech confident. So I'm definitely squarely in category B. What I mainly want to do, because of the limited time sometimes it's available for site visits, I want to talk through and sit down with folks. I want to find out where their hotspots are and then kind of reverse engineer our entrance into the toolkit. So we'll find out what things are the most troublesome, we'll find that section of the toolkit to help us, because we want our participants to understand what's going on, and then we'll do it that way. So it's kind of a different way of doing it. And then there's team approaches, which are hybrid. Sometimes, a toolkit visit, we're really talking about a single day or single visit, but there's no reason that you couldn't do this over several days or several opportunities, right? You can do it over a couple of weeks, trying to help someone through diagnosing all their tech. So team approaches can be done as well. So the broadband improvement plan, some tips and strategies for that. I want you to know that each one will be different. Now, the broadband improvement plan, that's after we've gone through the toolkit process and we start making some recommendations. Now, this written broadband improvement plan is important. Please avoid the temptation. A lot of techs will do this. Maybe not a lot of lay people, but a lot of techs will say, oh yeah, I told you as we were going what I thought you should do. And what I've experienced in that case, not from myself, because I'm very careful not to do that, but it's very easy for folks to note things that are not recognized by the person you're working with because they are a novice, right? They're not exactly sure what you mean. Maybe they don't know the terminology or the importance of what you're saying. So writing down the recommendations is really important. As well, I encourage extra documentation, including any drawings that may be helpful, sharing photographs that you may take, anything that you are doing in the process of the toolkit, to be sure to share that. The main tip is function over form. Remember that what the library needs to accomplish is more important than following the format precisely. And so the format we're referencing here is the format of the Broadband Improvement Plan. This was a thing that we created as a handy way to identify short-term and long-term needs, but you don't need to follow it exactly. The main thing is what helps the library get to where they need to get in the best possible way. So the strategy: identify the destination for each library and then create a logical path to get there. So this is an example, again, of our broadband improvement plan. You can see that this is broken down into short-term actions and to long-term actions. Essentially, the short-term actions, what I tend to do when I see that is I'll look at stuff that should have been done yesterday. And if you've been in a presentation with me, you've heard me say this. You've probably heard me say this about doing a diagnosis. For instance, if you go into a library and you see that they are using a hub for their network connections instead of a switch, then I often say, okay, we just need to stop right now. You don't need to learn anything else. We need to replace that hub right now with a network switch. And I say that facetiously, but the idea is that there's things that you might come across that really are immediate and urgent. That's the stuff to put into the short-term action plan. The stuff to put into the long-term action plan is you may see something that is more complex. Like, I'll give you a real example. There was a library I worked with on a different project that was using power line data. You might say, what is power line data? Well, it's rare. It was something that was a networking scheme that was created a long time ago to be able to extend data networks over power lines. It was really aimed at houses, right? Where maybe it was an older house and they were trying to get data connections in different rooms. There wasn't a good way to get data wiring in those homes. And this was before Wi-Fi was improved. I think this stuff was around the Wi-Fi. I'm trying to remember the era. It's been a while. Let's just say it's been 10 years. So there was a library in a classic building, in a very old, awesome building, and they were actually using wireline for connections to a very hard to reach part of the building. So you just never know what you're going to find. Also, that example I gave you of the hub, that's a real example that I've had. Now, I haven't seen a hub in the wild in 5 years, but as few as 5 years ago, I did. So I'm sure there's one or two out there somewhere. We got to find them and get rid of them and upgrade them. Here's an example of something that I shared with a client again in another project, but something that I'm showing here. This is the Tohono O'odham Museum and Cultural Center in Southern Arizona. It's a tribal cultural center. It's so awesome. It's so beautiful. It's used for a museum, for training, for cultural preservation, all sorts of things in this community. It's so cool. They were having some issues with their Wi-Fi. So we did Wi-Fi site assessment, took a look at things, and I created this map. Now, the first version of this was hand drawn. This is, of course, done with electronic means. And the idea of this is we were trying to suggest ways for the tribal, for the IT department for the tribe, which is a very good IT department. They simply said, we would love to hear your thoughts and then give us ideas on how we can improve things. And so in this case, we showed kind of a split between access points in terms of fixed access points for Wi-Fi versus ones that were portable. Those green areas that you see in the little green triangles, those are for these awesome outdoor areas where they have gatherings where lots and lots of people come. So that's a great place to think about having a temporary Wi-Fi access point.
7:29 a.m.
And thank you. I don't know why my watch just gave us a time check, but this is live. So my apologies. Let's get back to this. The blue circles are the fixed Wi-Fi. This is in the biggest part of the building that you see at the top of the drawing. That's for mainly where we have visitors and staff. In the building that's to the left, that's our educational center, which also has staff working in a staff room, but there's also a place for folks to learn, a classroom area. So this was kind of a complicated sort of thing, but this was one of the things that we left after doing the broadband improvement plan. So isn't that cool? We also in one case, we put together a troubleshooting guide. This is an example of doing something, again, that's written down that was helping this library figure out what to do when some of their computers were not working. And they were using a special sort of public computing situation. These weren't individual PCs. These were basically what are called thin clients. We won't go into the depths of what thin clients are, but basically they are like dumb terminals that have all the computing power on a server that's close by. And they're arranged in different banks. And so a lot of times when there were connectivity problems, the library was confused. They were like, we're not sure what to do when something happens. So what we did is we created on site, and I actually did a nicer version of it, but I wanted to show you that it doesn't have to be fancy. We created a very quick troubleshooting chart so that when they had issues, they knew exactly what their next step should be as they experience. So these are the kind of things that you should leave. So now we are going to go into demonstration and live practice of key toolkit techniques. And this is the clips show part of this. We're going to insert clips from other trainings that we've done. And then at the end, we're going to go through some situations that you may encounter and try to give you a heads up on how to deal with this. But we're going to go through the drawing of a network diagram, the drawing of a rack diagram, speed tests, Wi-Fi heat mapping, and the Wi-Fi Stumbler. So our first one will be the speed test worksheet. And this is what the speed test worksheet looks like. This is our official log. When you visit, you might wish to bring extra copies and pencils. Our pencils with you. A speed test log is a perfect leave behind, something that you can leave behind with folks. But be sure to photograph any work you perform on site for your own records if you do only have a single copy. Now we're going to go to a clip of a demonstration of how to perform a speed test. In most cases, in fact, I haven't heard of any negative impacts from this at all. So I think we can just safely say that this is a really good thing to do when you're trying to troubleshoot. So that's why we wanted you to learn how to do the speed test. So let's do a couple of speed tests before we do the network diagram. Now, the first one we're going to do is MLab. MLab is a kind of an open source, open publication organization. They work with a lot of the big tech companies in the world. They also have done some very library specific projects. So this is the MLab. a speed test. And let's see, I'm going to open this up a little bit more so that you can see there's a lot of noise on this. Let's just make that simpler. Okay, so we're going to begin the MLab speed test, and we're just going to start that up right now. And I am testing at my office. My office where Bonnie and I work is part of a co-working a place in Fort Collins, Colorado, and my office is a permanent office here. And this is the connection that's shared throughout the building for all the folks who use the co-working space. When we look at our results, we're just going to look at the download results right here. We have about 342 megabits a second download and an upload speed of 35 megabits per second. Not shabby at all on the download speed or even the upload speed, but you can right away tell something, right? And if you might be familiar with this, or you might have just learned it during this lesson, we have an asymmetrical connection here. We have a much faster download speed than we have as an upload speed. And this is a commercial connection. I believe it's through Xfinity. I don't know what they're called today. They used to be called Comcast. But anyway, this is an asymmetrical connection. 35 up is not bad, but you know, there might be some days there might be 40, 50 people here working, and if everyone was doing video conferencing, what do you think would happen with that number? Wouldn't be very good. I'll put it that way. So this is, I think, definitely, if I were to recommend an upgrade for my co-working space, I would say we need a symmetrical connection for us. But anyway, we don't want to just go to one speed test. We're going to go to also to speedtest.net. It's a common commercial speed test place on the web. It has, as you can see, lots of ads, which is cool. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but that's one of the differences between the speed tests. And it's valuable too, because they collect lots and lots and lots of data, as any speed test place does. Our upload and download speeds, as you can see, they are remarkably similar. 354 for the download speed at this moment as we're testing. There's always variations in the test, and it looks like our upload speed is about 35 megabits a second. So 354 down, 35 up at speedtest.net, 342 download, and 35 up at MLab. Now, the differences between those download speeds, those are not significant, just because, again, if I test it again, I might get different results. It's just getting it into the ballpark, having an idea, and again, the most important thing is testing this connection over time. That makes sense, right? And we can see if there's any patterns. I can tell you that the results that I get are remarkably consistent, and so that's cool and groovy. And now it's time for what I feel is maybe the most important site thing that you can do, and that is drawing a network diagram. And we have an example. We might even have a more current example of this to share with you. But this one's actually been tried and true, and we've used it for a long time. In this step, we are going through the process of drawing a network diagram. And here's our clip from a previous presentation. Now we are going to do a network diagram, and I don't know how, it depends, I guess, where you're at in terms of geek factor or technology factor, whether this is something that you would like to do. But I can tell you that for every class that I've ever taught this with, a segment of the class jumps right in. So if you think that you would like to do something like this together, print out this diagram and follow along with me. You're not going to be asked to turn it in, but I'd be tickled to see if you did this, if you could share it during our live session. So I'm going to move my microphone. I'm going to move over to my document camera, and I'm going to show you how to draw a network diagram and use that diagram to solve problems. So let's see, we're going to get the most amount of space that we can get here. There we go. Over here, this is a diagram that we have that's in the Toward Gigabit Libraries Toolkit. It's a sample diagram of what most networks mostly look like. If you can understand the chain of equipment that you see here and how they're connected, you can understand almost any network diagram that there is, even the ones that are like super complicated. Because in its simplest form, if we're thinking about how our PC communicates to things on the internet, it does not get much more complicated than what you see here. What we do see in the complications, especially in big places or multi-branch, multi-building systems, is this part of the network. The horizontal part, that can get wider and more complicated. But this route is about the same for everything. If you understand that, you can understand almost anything about internet connectivity and solve your problems when you hit an issue. It'll be more intuitive. So that's why this process is really, really good for you. We're going to start, usually it's better to start on one end than the other whenever drawing something like this. This is a very linear diagram, which makes it kind of simpler. I want you to notice that all of my pencils are sharp and they have erasers. And when you're doing a diagram, I recommend having an erasable thing. Maybe you can get one of those new awesome erasable pens, ink pens that have that erasable thing. Anyway, internet, iNet is usually a shortening way to say internet. You'll see that a lot on diagrams, so I'm going to do the same thing. And in the internet, we have all these different servers, we've got switches, we've got wires, we've got wireless connections, we've got this big jumble of things. And this is why this is why we use the cloud when we talk about the internet, because when we're thinking about it functionally, we don't need to get into all of those nitty-gritty details of how things are connected. Once it gets out on the internet, there's a way that things are connected to each other and they communicate with each other, so we can just call it the cloud. And that's why they call it the cloud. It's a useful term. It's not completely descriptive of everything that's going on, but it's mostly useful for what we're doing. So what I'm going to draw within the cloud is a couple of things that we might be accessing when we are doing internet. So maybe over here we have Google, and maybe over here we have Microsoft. These are like the Google website, google.com, Microsoft.com. Let's say we have Apple.com, and maybe in our case, maybe our ILS actually is not something that we have on site at our library, but it's something that we access over the web. We also have a very special member of the public internet, and that is our ISP, or Internet Service Provider. They are located right on the public internet, and they are our on-ramp to the internet. And I'm going to make a couple of fun things here to say. Number one, our ISP is Jane's ISP, and Jane is awesome. She thinks every library in the country needs to be connected by a gigabit and with fiber. And so Jane's ISP only uses fiber internet, and it's 1 gigabit. And Jane believes in the mission of the public library, so it is symmetrical. Same upload and download speed. It is a symmetrical connection. We really like Jane. Jane gets it. She also makes sure things are working all the time, so that's why we really love Jane. But that's our fiber connection, and we're really happy about this. So now I'm going to show you, this is the stuff that's outside our building, and everything below this line is inside our building. The first thing that we're going to hit when we get inside the building is we need to convert this fiber optic connection to a copper connection, because in the vast majority of cases inside of our libraries right now, we use copper wiring through Ethernet cabling to spread our internet connection out. So this is going to be an MC, or a media converter, that helps us convert this fiber optic cable to, I'll make sure that that's not a greater than or lesser than signal, fiber to copper. So that's something that we have to have if we're doing this. I'm also going to be fairly simple in this diagram, so that we're not getting too deep in the bushes, but that you can understand the basic concepts. But our next route, or our next stop for most networks, will be our router. And our router is our traffic director. Remember, I was talking about the PC talking to something on the internet. This router helps that communication happening. In fact, this is our most important router for our internal network, because it also directs traffic inside. Like if we have to send a print job to something, our router will indicate where it's supposed to go. Like when you send data out of here, it's like, do I go to Google or do I go to the printer? Well, the router helps route that data so that the right thing happens. And so that's what the function of our router is. Another thing to note about a router, especially in a small library or at your home, your router might also be a Wi-Fi access point. All right, it might have both of those things built in. And so that's something important to remember, is that the reason this functional diagram is so powerful is because sometimes functions that are different are actually combined in one box. Like if there's a Wi-Fi access point on your main router, it's actually two different things doing two operations. So we're not going to do that here. We want to have a more clear understanding and not combine things on this diagram. However, we might see that in your library or in your home. So we have our router there, and usually the next stop in our router as we're getting into our internal network is our switch. And so we're going to have a big switch here, and the switch is that thing that's usually next to your router with all the cables plugged into it. They look like telephone cables, but they're actually not telephone. They're actually, the connector is an RJ45 connector. It's bigger than the old telephone connector, if you even remember an old telephone connector. And so we have all those cables plugged into our switch. And this is a 10-100 switch. And so this means that the fastest speed that this switch is capable of doing is 100 megabits per second. This is going to be important later, so I want to point that out. Everything else, though, we've got a gigabyte right here. We've got a gigabyte coming down. Our router is also a 1 gigabyte router. That's how fast it is. Isn't that cool? And so then we go into the switch, and the switch is how we distribute the network throughout our building. And so I'm only going to draw one example of each type of device, but just imagine every time I draw one, you might have multiples. In fact, you probably have multiples. So let's say we have patron PCs, we have staff PCs, patron, staff, we have printers that are all plugged into this switch. We also have a Wi-Fi access point, and this Wi-Fi access point will communicate to our cell phones. I know cell phones don't look like that anymore, but that's, you know what I'm trying to say here. We have our laptops that communicate via Wi-Fi. We have tablet computers, etc. So when we're Wi-Fi, remember I was saying, people say the internet is Wi-Fi. It's like, no, our Wi-Fi is the internet. Nope, the internet's up here. This is how we connect and go through all these things. So what's really interesting about this diagram is, let's say that we're on a patron PC and we want to go to google.com. The way this works is our patron PC says, hey, I need to go to google.com. And the router says, I know where that is. Sends a signal through all this stuff in the internet to Google. Google gets it and they go, I've got your answer, and I'm going to send it back to you because when you sent it to me, you told me how to get it back to you. It comes right back through all this stuff to the patron PC. And that's how something super complicated operates on here. Now let's use this diagram, and I hope this is like this is super clear to you. And if not, we can talk about that when we're having the live session. Something really cool happened in this particular library. They got a funding boost, and they were able to upgrade all of their equipment. It was amazing. They were able to get 1 gigabit PCs, brand new, 1 gigabit patron PCs as well. The printers, we'll just say they're 1 gigabit, but they don't have to be that fast usually. And a Wi-Fi 6 system, which is the describing the speed and the effectiveness of this part of it. But this part is also 1 gigabyte. So we're like psyched. We got all this money. We got it put in. Everything's working really good, except we have discovered a problem, like we often do. And boy, are we glad we have a diagram, because that helps us understand how to solve the problem. When we did our tests, and it doesn't matter if we did it from a staff PC, a public PC, or even the Wi-Fi, but let's just focus for our consistency on this staff PC. Every time we did our test, this is what we were getting for a download speed consistently. It was about 85 to 90 megabits. I can't talk. This is why I've got an eraser. Megabits per second is that's not a D. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's just say 85 to 90 for download and upload. We're testing that. We're like, wait a minute. Jane sold us a 1 gigabit connection. We know that this is a 1 gigabit connection. Our router is 1 gigabit. We just upgraded everything in our network, and we're only able to get about 85 to 90 megabits a second, which is more than 10 times slower than the potential of 1 gigabit. What is going on? So if you were following along, you might have already solved the problem. And this is our problem. In our excitement of all of our upgrade, we didn't touch the switch. And you know why we didn't touch the switch? It's because it always seems to work. We plug things in, the little blinky lights go, it's able to see Google and Microsoft and Apple and our iOS, and we're thinking it's working fine. We don't need to upgrade that silly switch. It's powering up, it's blinking, it's doing things. However, we also know something else, and that is we have this linear chain, right? This linear thing that connects to back and forth from the internet. In this case, we can only be as fast as our slowest component. And our slowest component is this 10-100 switch, this switch that can never go any faster than 100 megabits a second. It can never get up to a gig. And that is why we're seeing these test results that are less than 100 megabits. It's because there's always a little overhead. You never get exactly what the switch is rated for because of the congestion in the technology that provides this. So it's always a little bit below, not a big deal. That is what we need to replace. And so we realize that we need to make this a gig switch, 1 gigabyte. So that means it's not just a gigabyte in the connection here, but each one of these ports are also capable of 1 gigabyte. And then guess what? We test again, and we are delighted to see that our speed tests are about 950, almost a gig, up and down. Bam, problem solved. All because we had an understanding of our network. We diagrammed this. We knew our specifications for everything connected to it, and we were able to solve a problem that we had. And it was an easy fix. So that's an example of how this is powerful for you. I've got to tell you, though, this can be used in other cases as well. We all know that have you tried turning it off and on again is the way sometimes to fix something, to reboot a piece of equipment. If something's not functioning, a lot of times people say reboot your router or reboot your PC. Having this shows you, because sometimes there's more equipment here, there might be a firewall, there might be something else. Having this map is so important to understanding your network and to being effective with things. So I hope you tried that. I think you'll like it. If you haven't done that, it's very difficult to solve problems that you might have within your networks. Now, somewhat related to the network diagram is drawing what's called a rack diagram. And a rack diagram is a little bit more specific, whereas the network diagram is showing us the functional topology. Well, that's a big word. The functional topology of our network, so that we can see in a linear way how our data flows from one device to the internet and back, or even between devices, etc. The rack diagram is a good way to really look at what's there and document it, right? So we have different things suggested on the left with pictures that will help. It doesn't include everything, but it's got most of them. But the idea here is to write as many details that we have, and to have a realistic picture of what we have in our closets, because a lot of times our shelves that have network equipment, or our data closets, they don't have things in that linear fashion because they really don't need to. As long as the wires are hooked in the correct manner, the stuff on the rack, they can go in any way that they should. And in fact, What tends to happen is heavy things like uninterruptible power supplies or UPS devices. If there's a rack, those are naturally going to go on the bottom because they're heavy, right? If there are things that are generating a lot of heat, those might go to the top so that they're able to vent better and they don't heat up everything else on the rack. Often at the top, at the very top of these things are patch panels to help distribute the signal. But anyway, you'll see a little bit more about that in this next demonstration or next clip showing how to create a rack diagram. So that's a look at a couple of other tribal areas. Now we're going to draw a rack diagram. Are you ready? Are you ready to draw a rack diagram? Do you have your coffee? Did you have a drink? I'm going to have a drink. And here we go. Let me see if I can end the show. Put that away. So the interesting thing about drawing the rack diagram this time is I'm going to pretend, even though you can use this brand new form I just created in person, I'm going to pretend that we're not in person, but that we are instead doing this remotely. And each one of you, for a moment, I would like you to pretend that you are the person helping with this rack diagram. Are you ready to do that? So track with me here. I promise you it's going to be easy, regardless of what you think of this mess of pictures. Now these pictures that you see over here to the left that I'm scrolling through, and everyone can everyone see the pictures and then see my hand waving here on the diagram? You can all see that? Okay, thank you. So this is something that you might find in a server room. And in fact, when we talk about the rack, the server rack, now remember that beautiful rack we saw in Heatmap? This isn't bad, but this may be more typical of what we see in a library. It's in a closet. There's some stuff and there's lots of wire, and it's connected together in perhaps not a best practice fashion. And we've got to figure out what's going on. Now, you're lucky because you understand this earlier diagram that we filled out. You understand that there's this stuff outside where it connects to the internet, but there's also this stuff inside. And so we've got some definitions of what the router is, the switch, the laptops, the devices, the wireless access points, etc. So we have that grounding. So as you're drawing this, if you're drawing it yourself, you probably have a copy of this to refer back to remind yourself what you have. However, one of the challenges that I know is there, especially for novices, is there is often, let's see, I'm gonna hit the focus on that, see if it'll focus a little better. Good. Often what we see is that we have remember I was talking about sometimes devices are combining functions, like one box might be a Wi-Fi access point, it might be a router, it might be a firewall, all in one. In other cases, those might be all broken out. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to have something like a little guide like this that shows the devices, and you can start simply by circling the things that you see. And then after you see them, you can figure out how they're connected all together. So you start with what you know, and then you build it. So we're going to go back to the full, I'm going to go back here, go back to the full pictures. And these pictures are available to you as well if you want to look at them. But essentially, I'm going to walk you through the pictures. Now, the first thing that we're going to look at actually is this thing right here. And as you can see, it's interesting. It says Comcast on it. It says modem login with the, oh, I shouldn't show you that. I'll do this one. It says modem login, and it has some stuff attached to it. This is the router that's serving this building. Actually, this is where I work, and this is the back of that router. And the reason we know it's a cable modem is because we had a clue. It had a Comcast sticker on it. It also has this coax cable connected to it right here. In the back, it also has an integrated switch. There is switch ports back here. There's, I think, a total of 8, and it's using 4 switch ports. You can see that we've got 4 cables. One's a purple cable. I want you to remember that purple cable. There's a yellow cable. There's a black cable. Actually, I think it's just using 3 of those ports. So on our over here, what we can say is that we can see what our ISP device is. And if we looked further, we could do the make and the model. I'm just going to put Comcast, and I'll put XXXXX for the model. And the speed we know is about 150 down and 20 up, because let's just assume we did a test or we pulled that off of something else. But we don't have to fill all that out right now, just if we know it. Didn't see a firewall in that room. In fact, I'm going to go back and see what the next device is that I saw from our, yes.
We have a request for you to speak louder.
Oh, sure. So is my audio weak right now? Let's try that. Is that better? Can you hear me better right now?
I think it's better.
Okay. So I increased the gain on the microphone. You may as well know what I'm doing, right? For technically, since this is a technical session, this microphone has a volume control that will increase the input level to the show. Can everyone else hear me okay? Okay. I see some head nods. Okay. Just interrupt me again, Bonnie, if that's not working very well.
Okay.
So what's interesting about this, and again, I'm going to go back to this big picture here and kind of show you what we have. What we have here is that modem that I took a picture of. What we have up here are patch panels. These are the idea of the patch panels these are things that connect. And in fact, we have to add patch panels to our diagram. So I'm going to put patch panel right down here as something that we have. We have something that looks like a switch here. So we think we have a switch. I'm going to go ahead and circle that. And we know we have Wi-Fi access points, but none of them are in there. So we don't have any Wi-Fi access points yet, but we know that something here is providing Wi-Fi. So I'm just going to put a question mark right there, because that's still a question mark. Like, how does this equipment over here equate to this drawing that we want to make? Well,
sorry, there was a question in chat.
Yes, please.
Daniel asks, what type of connection does fiber optic use? Is it still coaxial cable?
It depends. So fiber can be terminated into something like a patch panel, and all termination means is that you've taken the cable coming in, you've chopped it off, put a connector on it, and plugged it into something where it can be distributed to the rest of the network. In some cases, that fiber will go right into your ISP device. In other cases, it will go into a patch panel and go into what's called a media converter. And the media converter could convert it to coaxial, but that's not as common as converting it to Ethernet. It would probably be converted to Ethernet at that point. So that's a possibility for the fiber. So if you've got fiber, that's what you would look for, is that patch panel that also provides the media conversion, because at some point it has to go from light, which is the transmission format, into copper. So we have, we know we have a couple of things here. We have this thing that we think looks like a switch, and we've got a question mark here. Now, as we've done our conversations with this remote site, which again happens to be my office, we discovered that there is no wired computers in this building except for one. There's only one place where there's wired computers, and that's Carson's office. That's interesting. So that made me go back and look at this switch a little bit more carefully. And when I looked at the switch, what I discovered was that purple cable. That purple cable was special. And when I called up and traced that purple cable, first of all, the purple cable was going from the back of the ISP device, and it was plugged into the patch panel. And I thought that's interesting, because the ISP device it has a little switch as part of its functionality. And so I looked and I saw that this purple cable had it's got a sticker on it that says CB. So as I traced down this particular one, because this is the only wired connection, so that made me very curious about that wired connection, I discovered that this wired connection went into this patch panel right here. And the patch panel is a way to take things from the network and then distribute it to the rest of the building, any of the wired cabling in the building. And so when I looked at the wires, what I noticed is that this purple wire, that's the one right here, this purple wire, that's the one on the other end of that patch panel is in my office. At the end of that, interestingly enough, and I'm going to go back to this, at the end of that, we had this. It was plugged into this device in Carson's office. What is that? That is my own Wi-Fi router that's for use for my office and Bonnie only. And I've got a bunch of wires hanging off there. Those wires, to make a very long story short, those wires go to our computer platform. So this is what it looks like from my view of our broadcast today. That's my laptop and a second monitor, speakers, and I'm actually do have a wired connection to make sure that we are stable. So I've started learning enough about the network to actually start writing things down so I don't forget what I've learned. And what I've learned is that we do have a router and a Wi-Fi thing too, but we might have more than one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put CB's office here because I already know that it's unique. It's something unusual. And CB's office has Wi-Fi, but also hardwire to 2 PCs. So we were able to figure that out just by looking at the way that the network is routed. We also know that CB's office goes into a patch panel. And that patch panel is connected to our ISP device. Our ISP device, of course, is connected to the internet. And internet is sometimes, for shorthand, INET is used. You'll see that a lot of time. So right now, and hopefully I was going slow enough so everyone could stay with me. Right now, we can see that we have this route between the ISP device, this patch panel, which is simply just connecting these together. It's just a place to plug the input here, where the signal is actually going both ways, and the signal, of course, is going both ways here, into another area where the signal is going both ways into my remote office and serving my own little router and PCs. So that's cool, but what about the rest of the stuff? The rest of the stuff is kind of confusing me because before when we were looking, I thought we had this thing called a switch. And so I look at it because it's got all these cables plugged into it. And remember, our person said, we don't have any, we're all Wi-Fi. So we don't have any other wired computers. So that was a piece of the equation. So we know that that's plugged into this thing called, and I'm just going to do it this way so I can have room to draw. We're going to call it a Unify device. What's a Unify device? Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to Google it. I'm going to say, what is a Unify Switch 16? And when I do my Google search, I'll do it for you very quickly. You don't have to do it. When I do my Google search, I realize that this is actually a way to spread out Wi-Fi access points throughout the building. Now, this is just a standard switch. This in and of itself is not any different than a switch, but this switch is designed to work with this Unify system that is creating these Wi-Fi access points in a mesh network throughout the entire building. So that clears up this huge mystery. Why do we have all this cable in a place that's not running any cable? Well, now we know, because we need to have cable to connect these access points throughout the building to ultimately to the ISP device so that we have access to the internet. And so there's the signal flow there. And as I was investigating this unified device, I also saw this weird thing plugged in, this really big, weird box. And that made me worried because I'm security conscious. What is plugged into the network and why is it plugged into our network? I am curious. And there's a close-up of all the different cables plugged into that device. When I picked it up, I realized, let's see, there we go. When I picked it up, you can kind of see it's upside down, but this is Unify is actually the one of the brand names for Ubiquiti, which is one of the major providers of enterprise level Wi-Fi access points. They're more inexpensive than many. This is Unify's cloud key. So in order for everything to work in this system, this cloud key needs to be plugged in. It's the device that authenticates the use of this Wi-Fi system that says that it has been leased or paid for, the licensing has been paid for, and thus it will operate. And so I want to make note of that, is that we have a key plugged in, because guess what happens if somebody knocks into that key? All the lights can be on, everything can be blinking, but the Wi-Fi is not going to work, because for the Wi-Fi to work, it needs to access that key to function. That is the authentication for that service. So when we go back to the and there's also something right here that piqued my attention. This is power. Let's say this is power here, and I noticed that both the ISP device and the unified device were plugged into what looked like an egg timer. Right? This is a special egg timer. This is a device, and this will make you laugh. Its whole purpose is to shut down at an interval and restart, so that the equipment that is connected to it shuts down and restarts and stays stable. It is the most common way of trying to fix a problem, and it's probably one of the worst ways to rely on. You know, when you have to reboot something every day for it to be stable, that usually means that something needs to be replaced. However, our office has chosen to do that because it's lower maintenance too. It's like an easy way to ensure maintenance. So power timer is what I'm going to put here. And I know my writing is getting very, very tricky. But this rack shows our major components. We have our ISP device. We do have a switch here. We have a little switch on the back of the ISP device, and the Unify is actually a form of a switch. We now know we have a couple of different Wi-Fi access points. We have the Wi-Fi access points that are tied to the Unify system. We also have the one that's in Carson's office, because we traced down the cables and we were able to see what was going on. And of course, we also have a patch panel. And the function of the patch panel is to take the stuff that is in the network area and connect it to things that are spread throughout the building. And that's what's happening here. So this is a way for, and of course, I'm doing it very quick. And of course, I've got technical knowledge, like some of us on the call have technical knowledge. Some of us have none. But what I'm hoping is that starting to have some stencils kind of on the left of the things to look for, and having a knowledge of what it's supposed to look like in a topology, like what it's supposed to look like when it's all orderly. This is an orderly signal flow diagram. It's like a functional diagram. This is the rack diagram is more like an actual diagram. This is how all of our stuff is hooked up. This is another view of the network, but as you can see, while this one is broad and general, it gives you a sense of the general functions, this one's much more specific. So for instance, if my internet goes out in my office, I know that there's a couple of things that I need to check. I need to check my connection. Starting backwards, what I need to do is make sure that my PCs are connecting correctly to my router that I have in my office. Next, I need to make sure that the router is connecting correctly through the patch panel to the ISP device. And then finally, is the ISP device connecting to the internet correctly? And so even though that looks like a mess, the only thing I'm worried about in my office if something goes south is that signal chain right there. And that's exactly what I'll look like. As far as what's happening out here, if the other parts of the building are experiencing an internet outage as well, and a Wi-Fi is not working correctly, we might guess that our problem is actually with our ISP device or the internet connection, because that's the one thing that we both have in common, that we're connecting separately to this one device. And so if we're having a problem with that device, or if there's a problem with the line between it and the internet, that gives us an idea of where that problem might be coming from and what we should attack. So I'm going to stop at that point, because I know for some folks your heads are full. For others, you're like, yeah, I know this stuff. Does anyone have any questions or observations about creating your own network rack diagram?
Daniel?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Hey, my question more is we've got a pretty sophisticated rack. We've got like 3 switches, 5 wireless access points, and I'm pretty familiar with that.
Okay.
My general question was more about the difference. This is the one thing I'm a little confused on between fiber optic and cable.
Okay.
We have a modem from a service provider, Midco, that the coaxial cable goes into. So I'm 90% sure that means we have cable modem, right? And not fiber optic. Is there an easy way to tell for sure? Or should I just call them and ask? Because I think like the university here in town, I'm sure has like a T1 fiber optic connection, but I think all the residential houses probably just have cable. But
right. Well, I would do both, actually. What I would do is take a look at your, remember yesterday I was talking about this being the service entrance here. What I would do is go to your primary rack, and what you want to do is take a look at your router, that device that's the closest to the service entrance. And again, there might be a patch panel between what's coming in from the outside and when it's connected to your internal broadband device. Sometimes you can have multiple lines serving as well. So what is your connect speed, out of curiosity?
It's asymmetrical. It's pretty good. And I had to check this for a grant a couple of years back, and it actually got increased. But it's like, I think it's 100 or 120 download, but then it's slower. It's like 10 or 12 up.
Okay, so it's pretty fast. At 120, I would think that's a single line, but it just depends. The other thing that can happen here is that we can have multiple ISPs. For instance, you could have another ISP here coming in, and then these connections need to be bonded in some way. They're either routed in a different way, serving different parts of your network, which happens. Sometimes people will use that to serve, like the public network will be over one ISP and the staff network over another ISP for security reasons, or that they can be bonded so that they're both increasing your overall bandwidth and capacity there. So it all begins, I think, with understanding the basics of the topology, and then doing this process of diagramming your network so that you understand and you can see where those wires are going, regardless of how they're organized, whether the equipment is organized orderly or whether it's messy, like the thing I showed you, which is pretty messy.
No, that makes sense. We basically have a box on the outside wall that Midco installed and then comes through and goes into the cable modem.
Okay.
So I'm 90% sure that must mean it's cable and not fiber optic.
Take a look at the cable coming into that box. That will tell you if there's any media conversion going on in that box, which is possible. In most cases, though, if it's cable, they stay copper. They love their copper because it's in the ground and it's fast. And I don't blame them for loving their copper. It probably is copper coaxial cable carrying that signal. But you should check. Because you can just tell, you can just look at it. Fiber optic, of course, has different sorts of jacketing. At its core, it's very fragile and small, but it's usually bundled with a bunch of stuff to protect it, especially if it goes underground or outside.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Any other questions about the diagramming process? Okay. I hope that was helpful. I'm a geek.
This is very helpful.
Good.
I'm a visual person and I'm not a technical person. And this just really helps for me to get
Outstanding. Good. Because we do want to make these things visible. And I can tell you that where this makes the most sense is not when I'm showing you what's in my building, but when you're doing it with anything that you're working with, because all the stuff that you've kind of not looked at forever, you suddenly know what it all does. And then guess what else you do? You find things that are not supposed to be there. They're turned off. They're not working correctly. They've never worked. They should have been retired. And then you can clean and get that junk out. So that's also part of the benefit of doing this, that sort of activity. And next we have the Wi-Fi Stumbler. The Wi-Fi Stumbler is so much fun to do on site, and it's something that is extremely powerful. The Wi-Fi Stumbler helps us see the invisible when we are on site, and it helps us look at our Wi-Fi signals and understand how they're performing, how they might be in competition with other Wi-Fi signals in the neighborhood, etc. So it's time for our next clip. This clip telling us how Wi-Fi stumblers work and how you can use one. Very good. Okay, so thank you so much. This is the Wi-Fi Stumbler, and what this is showing me is every Wi-Fi signal that my laptop can pick up from where it is located. And we're in a kind of a busy complex where we have a permanent office and a co-working space. We've got offices all around us. We've got, you can see if it's up there, Sanders Inc., which is a tattoo shop. They've got a Wi-Fi network. We've got a lot of Wi-Fi here. And so this is typical to see this in a busy area like us. Right now, I'm attached actually to this Netgear-13. That is the name of the access point that serves our office. And you can see that signal is nice and strong. And this tells us a lot of other information about our environment. So if we're having interference, if we have if we're too close to another one, I'll show you a different view of this. If our Wi-Fi access point is not strong enough and we've got other access points that are part of it or on that same channel, there can be interference. We won't talk about this at this moment. We'll simply talk about signal strength. Now, what the best way to determine signal strength throughout your library is to do something called heat mapping. And so heat mapping is where you take a drawing, like an architectural drawing of your library, or even just draw the outline of what your library looks like from the outside. And then you walk around with a device that's either a laptop like this, or you can even put this on mobile devices like phones. And you track that signal to see where the signal is the strongest versus where it's the weakest. Of course, it's going to be the strongest the closer you get to your Wi-Fi antenna or antennas. As you get farther away, that signal will drop off. The signal can also drop off if you have, well, let's say metal shelves. I bet you have some of those in your library. If you have different building materials in the walls, like in the Southwest, they use Adobe, and Adobe has wire mesh as part of its structure, so that shields Wi-Fi signals. But by walking around this, you can see where your Wi-Fi performs the best, where the signal is the hottest, versus where it is not as good. And so that's an assessment tool that most everyone finds to be fun if they've never used it. To find what's working well and what's not working so great in their Wi-Fi access points. So I just wanted to make sure I showed you that. Any questions about Wi-Fi stumblers?
Would you know any other things that would dampen Wi-Fi signals besides metal shelves?
Yes. So there's a lot of things that can influence that. And so one of the things that we don't think about very much is that every Wi-Fi signal there, whether it depends on the operating frequency, there's 2.4, there's 5 gigahertz, and now there's 6 gigahertz. Mm-hmm. As the gigahertz increases, it has a faster capability, but its effective range gets smaller. Oh. Yeah, right. And that's why the Stumbler is really important to really see where the signal is. But the other thing is that all of the signals get smaller the more users that you have using it. So when you've got one user, you can be out in the hinterlands almost and pick up and use that Wi-Fi signal. The more users that are on your Wi-Fi access point, they're all sharing that radio frequency bandwidth, and so it actually shrinks the effective range of the Wi-Fi signal. So that's one of many, but that's another example of things that can do that. But yeah, building materials. The types of antennas, like it's really sexy to have an antenna built into our phone. We don't have that little antenna thing that I was drawing. Those antenna things are awesome. Because they're a physical thing, right? Mm-hmm. They're not sexy, but they're really awesome for signals. So if your access points don't actually have robust antennas, even ones that are inside and hidden, that can affect it as well. And finally, I just wanted to show you a little bit of how you can use Wi-Fi Stumbler, the results of that, to do what is called Wi-Fi heat mapping. Have you ever noticed that sometimes there's places in your building or outside your building where the signal's like super weak or unreliable for Wi-Fi? That's really the purpose, as we went over, of the Wi-Fi Stumbler. Now, if you have a drawing or something like a drawing, you can do this cool thing. And this is an example of just taking, and it's a rough drawing, and it's a rough drawing on purpose because it does not have to be fancy. But this drawing tells you an awful lot about this building. Now you can see this building is really an interestingly shaped building. It's almost like the letter I, with a little appendage there to the left of a building going out. So as you can imagine, this is a really hard building to cover with Wi-Fi. So in this example, this library only had 2 Wi-Fi access points. Now, this was not this was not one of the libraries that we did the toolkit on. You can see this is a huge library. This was from one of the clients that I have, one of the wonderful folks that I get to work with. So in this case, we had 2 Wi-Fi access points. And when we used our Wi-Fi Stumbler, that green area is the good. And we could see that we had a really strong signal when we walked around. The purple is so-so, and that means that signal dropped off significantly. And remember, the more people using Wi-Fi, the less performance each person gets. So you can imagine when you look at where that so-so signal is, how bad it could get, especially when you look in the lower left-hand corner and see that there is a big meeting room there. There's also some stuff in different parts of the library in those far corners where the service is not that good or non-existent. And then finally, there is the bad, and looking where the signal is really bad. It's so poor you don't count on it working at all. Hotspot we have for that, wrong term. The area of concern that we have for that, upper right-hand corner, where we just have bad coverage. So our solution then from this, after doing this heat mapping, would be actually to expand the number of Wi-Fi access points. And so in this case, what we would do is actually probably move and add Wi-Fi access points. In this case, I think we could cover this probably with 5. And so if you look at the top of the diagram, we would have two there, one to the right and one to the left, but off center. And then if you look way to the bottom, we would do the same thing. We would put a Wi-Fi access point in that meeting room to the left. We would put one in the that area to the right. That's actually their children's area. And then we would put at least one in the center. We might put 2 in the center, but again, we would do this as we were also doing using our Stumbler software and device to see how the signal was, to see if we needed to add another access point. So that's how you would use something like this. But this is a really powerful thing to leave behind. And I don't know a lot of people that do this. So it's a big opportunity to make a big difference in something that everyone needs and everyone uses. Another note too, in this case, the library may wish to have Wi-Fi access outside of the building. And so that would be an additional sort of consideration. With a building this big, what I would probably recommend is we would find areas probably towards the front where there is seating or a parking lot, and we would just put external Wi-Fi access points for access outside the building. That's probably what we would do. But, it's up to you. You're the person doing the analysis. So now, to kind of close things up, we're going to go through unique situations. Every library is going to have a unique situation. It will not be like anything that I'm even talking about here, but they're probably going to be kind of close because we've had a lot of experience with doing this, right? And we want to share that with you. So here's some common surprises and strategies to address in case you walk into a special surprise party. It's part of the fun, actually, especially for a tech. If you're not a tech, this is really the reason, too, that we want you to be ready for this, because it could throw you off and you might not want to follow through with what you're doing. We want you to follow through. It's not a big deal. Just have the benefit of our experience. Unique situation. Library not prepared for the visit. So what often happens is we try to have folks ready to see us before we get out there. For a lot of reasons, that doesn't happen. So one thing is I really love it if people can at least crack open the toolkit. Sometimes that doesn't happen. Or the library might be in the middle of an emergency or a crisis either that day or for many days or weeks before you get there. The other example is when the library is reluctant to participate in the visit. So it was a library that wasn't sure they really wanted to do this, but they went ahead and went along with it. This can happen. Strategies that we have, the first is just showing patience and kindness, just being as extremely understanding as you can, and focusing on one positive outcome for the visit. Now, that one positive outcome does not have to be reflected on any of the documents. It could simply be as easy as the library saying, oh, this is really interesting to know. I would like to do more of this. I would like to follow up on this. So you don't have to be solving the world's problems in this case. Maybe it's just the biggest thing to benefit is to get an interest in this and taking down any barriers that might be there for the library. Another unique situation is too many challenges. You get out there and you realize that the number of issues faced by the library is overwhelming, defined by you feel overwhelmed because there's so many things that need attention. So here's some strategies for that. One thing to do is, again, most of these strategies are really about slowing down and not trying to be in a hurry. So one strategy, allow staff members to share experiences as long as they need to. There is a healthy element of venting. Sometimes you may be the first time that they've had an understanding, an expert ear to hear the things that they've been going through. That goes a long way. So take good notes while this is happening, but let folks talk. Sort out what you can on site. You might not be able to sort everything out. Don't try that if you feel overwhelmed. Sometimes multiple problems are actually simple to fix, but you may require special knowledge to understand that. So if it's not coming to you, sort out what you can on site, but just take some good notes and follow up a little bit later after you're able to really think through what's happening. Find, though, one thing to focus on during the visit. That will be, that kind of relates to that the first bullet here where you were allowing the staff member to just kind of talk about things. If you can look at one thing to work through together, even if you can't really fix it, if they have a better understanding, that can go a long ways towards making things better. And then get ready to do some homework so that you can address the rest of the things that you're seeing out there and really sort these things. I promise you there is nothing that is not solvable. There isn't. It can look like it is, but remember, when worse comes to worse, if everything's broken, then what you do is something that's called rip and replace. You rip out everything that's there and you build it. And I would like to recommend that. In many cases, sometimes we have a number of key pieces of equipment that are just creeping along. The library's already invested money in them, and they really, they don't want to rip and replace. They're trying to take a piecemeal approach because of the budget. That may be the lowest value solution for them if so many things are broken. What would be better in many cases is, talking about the funding opportunities, for instance, via E-rate or other opportunities that might exist. Get all that junk out of there and put in stuff that's modern and working, and stuff that has someone who can pay attention to it and maintain it. That can be better too. So if you feel yourself overwhelmed, don't forget the nuclear option is perfectly acceptable in this case. Another unique situation, awkward dynamic between library staff and IT staff. This happens more often than I would like, but when it doesn't happen, it's a joy. But when it does happen, your job is to model bridging behavior, to model the behavior that the library and the IT department should have. You should serve as an interpreter between the sides, because very rarely have I encountered, usually what it is the library person is not confident in technology knowledge or language, and they're working with a tech who's also not really good at communicating. They might actually be really knowledgeable, but they're not a good communicator. So part of this is to interpret for both, trying to seek communication around solving a problem. So the idea is you don't dwell on things that are like past issues, because especially communication problems can spiral into new areas of discomfort, and they're actually not relevant here. You're there to help fix technical problems, and you got two players here that need to work together to make that happen. So focusing on the problem and simply identifying it to the agreement of both goes a long way. So that's part of that interpreter and that bridging behavior, and not looking at things that can get in the way socially in those conversations. Focus all conversations on creating positive outcomes for patrons. I cannot emphasize enough how we can get into personal difficulties when we're in this sort of situation. If we forget that patrons are why we're here, then it's easy to allow those bad elements to grow. If we focus on serving patrons, we then have a single common customer, and that's our pathway to success. The good part about this is the truth. Anyone who says that our purpose is not serving patrons need to really look at what they're doing, right? Because this is our purpose, serving the community. And that is what the role that we have, including when I am coming out to a library as part of this grant project, or any client that I work with. I am actually there working for the patrons that they serve. So we have a common customer as we're working towards solutions. This orientation, especially if you are confident in voicing it and positive about that, how important the work is that we do, this can go a long way towards diffusing some of these situations and then getting to solutions. So modeling bridging behavior, I just wanted to show this bridge over troubled waters. It's a nice fall day, so that's kind of cool. So overall, pro tips for unique situations: welcome the challenges, but stick to the script. Remember to come out and to complete the items that you came out there to do as best as you can. Again, sometimes we pull back our expectations if things are too big, but that's also sticking to the script. Be prepared with toolkit materials. So bring extra printed toolkits and worksheets, bring sharp pencils or erasable pens, whatever you think is good. But remember, this is an active thing, so be ready. Be sure to test your own tech. Make sure your laptop, your phone, your batteries are charged, everything's working. The worst thing you can do is be fiddling with your own stuff. So work that out before you hit the road, because when you get there, they've been anticipating this visit and they want to get to work. And so those initial moments are so important. Also, when it's possible, have your own means of internet connectivity ready to use. In other words, tether to your phone, have your own mobile hotspot, etc. So don't count on their stuff working. That happens a lot. So make sure you have an alternate way, because you might need to look something up. You might need internet access for one of your purposes during the visit. Key point: focus on conversations and connecting with people, and creating a positive outcome for the library. So if you do nothing else, and just remember that this is a conversational activity and we're looking for positive outcomes, you will find your way to success and be helping that library, and more importantly, be helping everyone in the community that they serve. So just a brief note, talking about my adventures in virtual assessments. I was working for the New York State Library, and they wanted to know a little bit more about the connectivity in the field. New York is a very interesting state in that they have, huge city as part of their state. And then they have a lot of rural areas. And each of these rural areas, and including the city, are served by different library systems. Each of these library systems provide different services. So it's not like, if you're in library system A versus library system B, like Mid-Hudson and Mid-York, they have two different sets of services that they offer, two different ways of providing technology support, etc. So you can take that and multiply it against all the systems there. So there's a lot of different elements there. And so what we did is we put together a way to do virtual assessments, and we were able to test it out. And this is an example of one of the flowcharts. This is for the new system participants to get people on there. So this is just a screenshot from a training that I did there. But basically, we selected new library systems. We had an orientation training. We select new library participants. We have an intro letter, a training session where we do Tech 101, homework for the participants. The homework is really important because this is a remote assessment. So what we did is we asked folks, and this is where I'll kind of get into the details of these remote assessments, because you can do the same thing with a Toolkit visit. We asked them to, we gave them a training, giving them the kind of the 101 sort of Toolkit examples and some of the things that we went over actually in this program. But we asked them to provide a video to walk around their library, to show us all of their technology, and to go slow because sometimes people will, spin that camera around fast and it's hard to see what they're trying to show us. We wanted to see the technology environment, but we also wanted them to tell us about the unique elements of their library, tell us about their patrons and their programs, because all these things are important when we're thinking about the technology. We also asked them to send pictures. Pictures of their technology as close up as they can, including model numbers, the fronts and backs of things, etc. And so that homework was then provided by the participants to the assessors. The assessors would then, that means me and others, would review this homework and start putting together a network diagram and start putting together different sorts of documentation to help them. Then we would meet, after we put that together, we would meet with the library. We would ask this to be a video meeting if they could support it, so that if we needed to ask them to chase after something or to look at something again, they could do that. And this worked really, really well. And so here's an example of getting some photographs of things and then making a network diagram just with pencil and paper. And put that together. Here's another example of doing that. And in this case, you can see some different colors. And these different colors, this was for my interview with the library so that I could learn a little bit more about what I was seeing and trying to sort it out. So starting with, handwritten stuff that you see on the left, and then using colors to circle areas where I had some questions. That's what we did. And then we created a nicer diagram to the right, of course, to preserve anonymity. We've deleted access to the name of the library, but these are actual documents that we shared with folks as we were looking at their network diagrams. So of course, the network diagram started with something kind of like that, or something to the left here based on our example diagram. And then we created something a little bit more fancy, a little bit more easier to understand. But the idea is that it is possible to do this in a remote session, but it takes a lot more planning. There's a lot more process, as you could see. We have a fair amount of process for our Towards Gigabit Libraries toolkit. However, this is even a lot more than that. Because folks have to be ready, and they really, that part where I said one of the surprises you might have is someone not ready to participate. That doesn't work with remote assessments. You really need someone who's motivated to do their part and to be able to contribute to the process, because otherwise it doesn't work. It's really a teamwork thing. So there's a little bit more thoughtfulness going into that selection of folks, because we don't want to stress out anybody or ask people to do things they don't want to do. But we also know that doing remote assessments will not be successful without having that assistance on the library side. So that wraps up our training. You might have questions, comments, or concerns, and please do reach out to us. Our contact information, or you can contact us through the Towards Gigabit Libraries website, which Internet2 will be maintaining for as long as possible. We don't know for how long, but it will be there. As long as I'm working in library land myself, you can just get a hold of me and ask questions. My email address has been posted throughout this presentation. It is librarylandtech@gmail.com, or carsonblock.com. There is also, it's probably the easiest, is carsonblock.com, is to just fill out a comment form, and I'll be very happy to get back in touch with you. Stephanie and I plan to remain connected, as well as other folks in the process. We plan to remain connected for a long time because we believe in this project. And just because this grant has wrapped up, that doesn't mean that the need has diminished. So this is important stuff, and we're here to help you move along. Our team, Stephanie and I, are the project directors, of course. I also want to thank Therese and Bonnie. Therese on the Internet 2 side, Bonnie on the Carson side. The four of us have worked together hand in hand throughout this process. Also want to thank Internet 2 for their support, Mike Erickson and Lenika Starks for their support in different areas of this on the Internet 2 side. And of course, another shout out to James Neal of IMLS, who has made things possible for us. We also want to thank, you haven't heard about these people yet, but we want to have a warm thank you to both James Worley and Susanna Spellman. James Worley, Susanna, and I were the original team working on the first grant. Susanna is just search what she's doing. She's doing these amazing things in telecommunications and policy, and she's wonderful. James, unfortunately, passed away in 2018. A lot of us knew him and miss him so much, but the three of us were that initial team, and so we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware. And if you ever see Susanna, thank her. I think some good thoughts for James too. So our contact information, it's all right here. You have lots of ways to get a hold of us. Again, we know that or I should say, we hope that this video will be helpful to a lot of organizations long after the toolkit process has wrapped up for us. So please do reach out. This is something that's important to us. And thank you for working through this training. It's been a pleasure to put this together, and we hope that you can use it to make a huge difference for so many people everywhere. Thank you.